Hi there, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're not new here. My name is Gina, and today I'm going to share my shopping philosophy or my wardrobe philosophy. This idea actually came from Katie 3700, who commented on one of my videos and was wondering like what's my approach to adding to my wardrobe. And Katie, thank you so much for asking that, because at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I have much to say about it. And then the more I thought about it, I just like kept ruminating on it for days, and I was like, actually I have a lot to say on it. And if you're not new here and you've watched some of my videos, you know I can ramble a little bit. So I took notes, actually took notes so that I won't ramble so much. Honestly, my whole approach to shopping has like swung from one side of the pendulum all the way to the other over the past like 15, 20 years. In my early 20s, I was a little bit of a clothes horse. Like I was a shopaholic. I would buy a lot of fast fashion and just have an abundance of things, and it was so overwhelming. And then in my early to mid 20s, I swung in the opposite direction, trying to like solve that, and became an uber minimalist and really strict and rigid about what I brought into my home, my wardrobe, like all aspects of my life. And that lasted until like my later 20s. And then finally, like in my 30s, I kind of started to level out, and I'm at this very happy medium that matches my lifestyle and my budget and my values, and I feel very content with the way that I consume, and it feels much more intentional. Some of my background, I am an environmental scientist. I'm a geologist by training. I went to graduate school studying climate change and climate science, and I have worked in that field my entire career. And in between that, I also had a small business for several years, over 5 years, making clothing. And that's it was my hobby. I turned it into a side hustle, and I had a slow fashion brand called 2 Days Off, which was so near and dear to my heart. I closed it when I had my son, just because I can't do all the things. And but it's still slow fashion and sustainable fashion, and more mindful consumption is absolutely a cornerstone of my life. So yeah, thank you for asking this, Katie. I'm gonna try not to ramble too much, and I'll jump right into it. So this might feel familiar to some of you and maybe not to others, but this is my experience, my story. I grew up in a working class family, like pretty low income, and so we were inherently mindful about what we brought into our home. My parents would want to buy quality. My mom was always hyper conscious of that, and buy things that would last. And when I was shopping for myself out of school or in undergrad, I thrifted a lot. I remade things. I learned how to sew so I could make my own stuff and have like the latest trends. And then after school, or actually it was still in undergrad, when I started to make my own money, I worked as a barista and part-time, and I also worked on campus part-time, and I did research part-time, so I would always have at least 3 jobs in college. And once I started making money and I didn't have any expenses for the most part other than school, I was spending it, and I was spending it on fast fashion galore. H&M, Forever 21, like those were actually the 2 biggies. Zara was like out of my price range, but I was over consuming tons of fast fashion, and it felt amazing to be able to like see the cute thing and be able to buy it, and like have a ton of $15 tops and some that you wore once and then you washed it and it fell apart. So that might be familiar to you. That was very much all through my late teens, more my early 20s, cycling through really painful and cheap shoes that fell apart after a few wears, or if you wore it in the rain, or like wearing something and then all of a sudden it doesn't fit anymore because you washed it and it shrank in weird ways or it warped. So yeah, there was a lot of that overconsumption. As you can imagine, there was just a lot of stuff. And then there was also a lack of direction with my personal style. I mean, I was in my early 20s, I was figuring things out, I was influenced a lot by trends, aren't we all? And so yeah, there was just a lot of overconsumption. Then fast forward to, okay, I am out of school and I have like my first job in my field. This actually took a few years because I graduated during the Great Recession. If you know, you know. It was a struggle. Had a bunch of weird jobs, odd jobs, and then eventually in like 2011-ish, I landed a really nice, stable, good paying job, had a great apartment, felt pretty, set, had a full wardrobe, mostly of thrifted items. At that point, I had started shifting away from cheap fast fashion because I didn't like how things were fitting me. I was focusing more on thrifting high quality goods. I loved Nina Garcia at the time. I was obsessed with Project Runway and Nina Garcia, and she had these books that came out that talked all about like, it was like the 10 essential items. I'll put it somewhere, but like the 10 essential items for Parisian style or for a core wardrobe or something like that. And yeah, so I was very like intent on building like a foundational wardrobe that I loved. And so I thrifted a lot of it. I would get things altered and tailored, but it was still a lot coming in. I remember in that apartment, it was like for a big enough for a couple, and it had two large closets, a his and hers. And the entire thing was packed with my stuff, like tons of shoes and jackets and coats and bags and like just so much stuff. And it was beautiful, but I absolutely was not wearing it. A lot of it was like beautiful for the sake of being beautiful on a hanger. And so it wasn't until I was ready to leave that apartment a few years later and go to graduate school. I was having to move back to New York City. I knew my accommodations would be a lot smaller, and I felt so overwhelmed by everything, like getting rid of everything in my apartment. And that's where I started to, this was like a year out from grad school, I started to think, oh, what am I going to do with these things? Am I going to pay to store them for, you know, a year and change while I'm in grad school? Or do I get rid of it? Can I get rid of it? And around that time is when I got into the minimalists. Very bro-y minimalist blog, but they aren't really bros, but it's two guys. They talk about minimalism, and I got sucked into the minimalist lifestyle and the idea of detaching your identity from things, and really creating a sense of freedom in your life from that. So I went the total other end of the spectrum. I sold almost everything I owned. I was really huge on Etsy, selling my vintage things. Some of them I kind of wish I never did. Not gonna lie, there's a few things that I'm like, oh, I would love to repurchase now, but can't find them, or they're so insanely priced at this point. Anyway, not gonna get into that. Maybe another time I can talk about all my long lost Coach bags that I've that I let go of. Anyhow, and then going the other direction where I literally could live out of a suitcase. And actually what I ended up doing was selling all of my earthly possessions, leaving my job a month before grad school started. So the month of like end of July, and I spent the whole month of August traveling Europe, which was an incredible, incredible experience. I sold all these things, and I saved all this, or I earned all of this money through selling those things, and I spent it on this trip backpacking through Europe for a month before I go to grad school. I always told myself, like, I don't know what's going to happen after grad school. I don't know where I'll find a job. I don't know what I'm going to want to do. So this might be my last chance before I'm like settled into a job or on the job market or whatever else, to just be up and go. Totally no regrets. I think it was the most liberating thing to be able to let go of all of my stuff and realize that none of that defines me. It was the break that I needed from like hoarding and feeling heavy and bogged down. Even the idea of me being in school in a new city or back in New York City and, you know, having things in storage just seems like a weight. And so, yeah, letting go of all that was a new chapter, you know, moving on to my more minimalist self. So fast forward, I'm back in New York, I'm in school, hyper focused on that, and I decided to be just hyper minimalist. As I mentioned, I had my core wardrobe. I was very strict about what I would bring in, what I would bring out. I think I kept under 50 pieces of clothing, including shoes and workout gear and bags and all of that. And so I was very into just one pair of black jeans, one pair of blue jeans, a striped shirt, a navy striped shirt, like a white stripe, navy stripe, one black jacket, like very much a very boring basic wardrobe. I had one leather jacket and one denim jacket, and then when things would wear out, I would replace it, and that was the only time, which was incredible. For a broke grad student, great. And it also eased the burden of my mind about thinking about what to wear, but it wasn't really fun. It wasn't playful. I love fashion, I love clothes, I love style, personal style. And so that was like my era of hyper minimalist, super simple like style. And I looked fine, I looked good, and you know, everything I think I chose in my like kind of capsule was totally fine. but it was really boring. It was really boring. There wasn't, anyone could wear exactly that and it didn't say, oh, this is Gina, you know? So that was me all the way through grad school. I actually met my partner in grad school and he also was pretty minimalist. He's an architect and they kind of veer towards the minimalist aesthetic, but he was also like a minimalist in his lifestyle as well. So that we like bonded immediately over that and we were hyper compatible in that. Being a minimalist also works really well when you're living in one of the most space scarce cities in the world, maybe other than like Tokyo and a few others, but it's tight in New York. I think my apartment was maybe 800 square feet, but then my bedroom itself was probably like a 10 by 8 or something, or 10 by 6. It was very tight. My queen size bed went wall to wall. Let's just put it that way. So it was tight. So anyway, me and my partner, we ended up after a couple of years, moved in together. We were super minimalist in our studio apartment. It was a beautiful apartment and we kept it super tidy and super tight, but it was definitely sparse. It was a sparse home that we had built. It was our home, but it was very sparse and it had to be for us to be able to function and live and have a clutter-free mind and grow in our careers at that time. Okay, all this backstory is to say, I am no longer a hyper minimalist. I don't consider myself a minimalist anymore. If you go back on my blog, you can read more about it, about that phase and what prompted me. I do still adhere to a lot of minimalist like philosophy and psychology. I think a lot of it is about mindset, and the most important thing for me was not attaching like my identity to things like, oh, because I have this, I'm this type of person. And if you're interested in exploring that, I highly recommend this book called Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki. Yeah, this book really changed my thinking. I know a lot of people talk about The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. I never read that book. I felt like I got so much of it from the zeitgeist and from pop culture I didn't need to read it. But Goodbye Things was really really informative to me because it talks about a guy who understood that he was a hoarder. He had a lot of collections of things, which having collections is not a bad thing, but when you tie it to, when it's impeding your like quality of life, then it becomes an issue. And then also when you tie it to your identity, like, oh, because I have this, I'm a better person for XYZ reasons, that's not true. You are a valuable, worthwhile person without anything. You are already within you. And so that's where I think detaching, oh, because I have this type of watch, or because I wear this kind of earring, or because I drive this kind of car, really detaching that from who I am as a person freed me up in so many ways where now I can wear what I want. And don't get me wrong, like what you wear is absolutely a signal to the world of class and status in certain ways. But internally, it doesn't need to be that way, in my opinion. Anyway, so Goodbye Things was an incredible read for me, and being able to let go of things when I need to and understand when things are getting in the way of the life that I want to live has been incredibly valuable for me. Now, I don't consider myself a minimalist anymore because I do buy things. I'm not nearly as strict as I was about like one thing in, one thing out. I'm not nearly as strict about like not having any clutter or any redundancies in my wardrobe. Now I'm a lot more easeful with my purchases and what comes into my life and what I keep, what I don't. You know, I used to be just very rigid, and honestly, that mental burden of counting my things and maintaining like a specific number was too much. It was good to teach me some discipline, but it's not the way I want to live my life forever. So now when I purchase, I have some internal rules that I kind of follow. It's nothing about I can have 10 jackets and I can have 20 shoes and I can have, you know, that kind of thing. It's not that at all anymore.